Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel Airbus What's It Doing Now, and sorry for the long break. As back to the flying program now and out of the simulator, which has been, as many of you will know, has been somewhat relentless, and I've also just completed a TRE course, which was obviously very involving, enormous amount of fun though, I have to say. So a big thanks to the tutor or tutors, and my sim partner was excellent as well, which always makes a massive difference. What we're going to have a look at today is an event concerning a go-around that was performed in clean configuration. Now, if you haven't seen any of these before and you're new to the channel, I tend to pick up these safety articles which are in the Airbus Safety Magazine. You can pick these up and you can read them as easily as I can. Just Google Airbus Safety Magazine and you can pick up the articles and read these yourselves. What I tend to do is just add a little bit of meat to the bone with my experience and have a look at some of the tech behind it and some of the lessons that we can learn from it. In this case was a case study concerning an intercept from above, a high energy approach performed by a crew on an Airbus 319. And do remember, what we're not doing here is passing any assessment on the crew whatsoever. We're just learning from their experience to see how we can avoid and trap and mitigate these threats in our operation on our day-to-day line operations. So we'll start with a case study, which was this intercept from above with a high energy approach. A go-around was executed in clean configuration, which of course didn't engage the go-around SRS mode. The aircraft continued to accelerate in toga down the ILS. Gear was then retracted as they subsequently went into a manual go-around, and which then ultimately led to the gear retraction, a gear exceedance speed and associated warnings, etc., before they then levelled off and came back in for a subsequent approach. We'll take a look at the case study on this in more detail, and I've got the Airbus Safety Magazine figures which will appear somewhere around my head, so that you can follow it through. We look at the case study itself. We'll have a look at the actual go-around and some of the performance data associated with that, the event analysis, what ultimately led to it. Then we have a look at some of the flight guidance behaviour during the go-around in clean configuration to remind us of what we need on the 320 with the current system that we have. There are some updates coming through and on some operational guidance considerations, and then to look at some system enhancements. The 350 already has this upgrade to my knowledge, and just looking at this chart here confirms that, but it also looks at the various other types if you are a 330, 40, 80 or 220 operator, when that's likely to be available. In fact, actually I think the 350 is already available. Yeah, okay. So we'll come on to that in a little bit more detail, and we'll look at that to give you an idea of when the 320 specifically for us in this channel is likely to have that software upgrade, or certainly software upgrade available. So let me read this to you then, and then we can look at it in more detail. So 319 was on descent with the autopilot and auto thrust engaged. The flight crew was preparing to perform an ILS from above. Already you can see intercepting from above is a procedure that we're all familiar with, and it's not an overly complicated procedure, but you can already imagine that the workload is getting high. There's no detail here about the profile other than one might assume it was it could potentially be high energy, as we'll see, but also a shortcut. So you can see all of the error chains sort of forming up in a nice tidy line. The aircraft experienced moderate turbulence conditions during the approach phase. The aircraft captured the localizer at 10 nautical miles from the runway threshold. The aircraft was descending in VS mode at 2,000 feet a minute in the clean flaps configuration with the gear up. Now we know in our experience, if you're descending at 2,000 feet a minute in the clean config with the gear up, the aircraft's only going to do one thing, and it's going to accelerate. But of course they needed to capture the glide from above. And with a selected altitude of 2,500 feet, the aircraft intercepted the 3-degree glide path from above at approximately 2,500 feet QNH, which was 7 nautical miles from the runway threshold at 225. 2,500 feet, 7 nautical miles, 225 knots, clean. So crossing 2,300 feet, the aircraft's speed was 236 knots and increasing. The flight crew decided to extend the landing gear to reduce the speed. So trying to manage the energy of the aeroplane by selecting the gear down. Now crossing 1,300 feet QNH, the aircraft was still clean, and the speed was now 240 knots. The flight crew then pushed the thrust levers to toga to initiate the go around. Now we don't know if what the crew situation awareness was like now, but you can imagine the workload is very, very high. The lock and the glide slope guidance modes remained engaged, and the aircraft started to accelerate towards the ground along the 3-degree glide slope. So why were those modes still engaged? Well, because the go around SRS wasn't engaged, because one of the critical elements that we need in order to engage the go around SRS is selecting flap. And I'll pull out an extract out from the FCOM here. The article suggests flap 1 is extended, but actually I believe it's when the lever is extended. Now crossing 1,130 feet, the aircraft speed was now 243 knots, increasing. The flight crew then selected the gear up, but of course this exceeds VLO retraction of 220. That was already exceeded. At approximately 800 feet then, the crew then select 3,000 feet on the FCU altitude, and then pull the out selector knob. The flight guidance modes then leave lock and glide slope. They go to lock. They go to glide slope. They go to open climb. Guidance modes engaged, and a nose up command is sent to the autopilot and the flight director. Aerodynamic forces meant that the retraction of the landing gear was difficult. The nose gear did retract correctly, but both main landing gears remained extended. The overspeed warning triggered due to the VLE of 280 knots. The pilot flying disconnected the autopilot and applied nose up inputs in a manual flight now. The aircraft reached 312 knots at 600 feet before climbing back up to 3,000, where the pilot flying re-engaged the autopilot when in out mode. The main landing gear fully retracted 2 minutes and 30 seconds later whilst in level flight, with a speed back at 205 knots and at 3,000 feet. So the gear eventually did come up once it got below VLO. The flight crew eventually performed a second approach and then landed the aircraft safely. So an awful lot going on here. You can see in this picture here, when the toga thrust was selected, the gear was selected up 3,000 feet, and you can see the overspeed down, the manual takeover took place. And you can see there on the gear indicators, which is from the LGC U1, both the main landing gears were unlocked. Were not uplocked. They remain down in some configuration. The report then goes on to the event analysis, which talks about the high energy approach. So the aircraft started its glide slope intersection from above in the clean configuration at high speed. So there it is. High energy approach and intercept from above. There's a lot going on there for the crew. As a result, the flight crew was not able to sufficiently slow the aircraft down to stabilise its speed as they decided to perform a go around. So very difficult in clean configuration to slow the aircraft down at pretty much any weight. We need at least slats or flaps 1 out in order to have some control over that. And it's worth actually reviewing your FCTM and your company guidance at intercept from above in terms of flap and gear configuration and rates of descent. It's worth having a look at that. Now. Now, non-engagement with the go-around modes. So the 320 family, the SRS go-around mode and go-around track engages if I haven't shown you already, I'll pull out that FCOM extract. The flight crew selects the thrust levers to the toga detent, and the aircraft's airborne or on the ground less than 30 seconds, and the slats or the flaps are extended. Now, I believe that is flaps lever. Okay. Therefore, when the pilot flying pushed the thrust levers to toga, the SRS and go-around track did not engage, and the autopilot remained in the glide slope lock final approach modes. So until they pulled open climb, it remained in glide slope lock. So when they pushed toga, all they got is toga thrust, and they accelerated then down the glide path as the modes were commanded at obviously an increasing speed and increasing energy. Now the crew reaction time, it took 30 seconds for the crew to react and disconnect the autopilot, lead to an overspeed condition, 312 with the main gear extended near the ground at around 600 feet. So like I say, a lot going on there. The gates, obviously, again, review your company SOP. We've got 500 feet for a normal approach. We've got 400 obviously for circling, but also 1,000 foot gate for to be in the landing configuration. So certainly from my perspective, many of these things were missed and could have executed this missed approach much earlier on. I don't know with this crew what airline it was. It's not important as to what their gates are. Well worth reviewing and perhaps playing through in your mind how this might have been avoided using your own company SOPs. So there's a little table here. At the time of publication of this article, all aircraft except the 220 and 350 with Prim 12 and subsequent standards, the flap config must be selected other than clean flaps configuration in order to activate the go-around mode. I think we're well aware of this now. Table 1 summarises the slat flap conditions for activation of go-around guidance modes applicable for each aircraft type. 4 conditions for activation can be found in the FCOM under flight guidance. So you can see here when we look at the 320 family, 330, 340 and the 380, greater than equal to or greater than config 1 is required. And if you have a look at the 350 here with this Prim P12 rather than P1, for those of you that operate it, there is you can actually get those modes with certain conditions, but I'll talk more about that a little bit later on. It then talks about the 220 aircraft. I'm not concerned about that. On 350 aircraft with the P12 and subsequent standards, they are available in clean. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So operational considerations. A flight crew must be aware of the potential for go-around modes not to engage on some aircraft when in the, well, for most actually, certainly from our perspective until we get this update. The FCTM states that if the thrust levers are set to toga detent during approach with the flaps at 0, the following occurs. The autopilot flight director remains in the approach or landing mode. The FMS does not engage the go-around phase and remains in approach, and then lever climb then flashes on the FMA because that's where it's expected them to be with those flight director guidance modes. This means when the thrust levers are set to toga detent, the aircraft's energy would rapidly increase, but the aircraft will remain on its approach path, as I said earlier on. In this situation, the flight crew must take appropriate action without delay. And this is essentially executing a manual go-around. Pitch up 15 degrees, turn the flight directors off, straight to toga, and then do a manual raw data go-around with the sensiblest thing. I don't think at this point there's time really to go open climb and leave the automatics in. Once the aircraft's going away, re-engage in flight directors and open climb, re-engage the autopilot and get yourself up to the go-around altitude. Seems the most sensible, logical choice. Please add your input and your comments in the comments section. Would be great to see. So SOP guidance for configuration on the approach. Correct SOP application should prevent the aircraft being in a clean configuration during final approach. You'll have, particularly in line training, we advocate getting the speed and the energy to manage much earlier on with a config 1 on base leg, and that way then we're in a much better place then to start selecting gear and flaps associated with your speed profile. Of course, this will all be briefed, but there are times when an intercept above procedure needs to be flown, and again, if we brief this nice and early as a potential threat, we can trap it and mitigate it from happening. But I don't want to advertise the intercept from above procedure as a horrifically terrifying procedure. It really isn't. In fact, it's it's really straightforward. But if it catches you unaware and you have high energy at the same time, it can be a difficult situation to manage. And quite honestly, it's probably arguably best to throw it away from a much earlier stage. System enhancements. An update from the flight guidance mode was launched on the 320, 330 and 380 to have similar engagement logic as the 350 fleet, fitted with the PRIM P12 or subsequent standards. The update logic will enable engagement of SRS and go-around track when in clean configuration if the flight crew sets the levers to TOCA, provided the aircraft is below 2,500 feet AGL and the go-around altitude is above, the FCU altitude is above the aircraft, or the aircraft is below the FCU altitude, as it says in here. The planned availability for the flight guide modification of each aircraft type is indicated in this table too, and we can see here on the 320, what have we got? Mid, okay, so depending on what standard you've got, 2026 to 2027. It's already available on the 350. So the 350 again, the aircraft that seem to be, setting the standard in terms of of updates that we're seeing coming through on the 320. So today on most Airbus aircraft except the 220, 350, the flaps configuration must be different than clean to activate the go-around guidance mode. The flight crew must be aware of the potential non-engagement of the go-around mode when initiating it in clean config. If this happens, the flight crew must take appropriate action without delay to prevent the aircraft from being in a high energy situation near the ground. Application of the SOP should prevent the flight crew from being in this situation during the final approach and to be at least config 1 when commencing the final descent. As an additional safety net, an update to the flight guidance mode is planned from the 320, 30 and 80 to enable the engagement of go-around modes in the clean config, like we mentioned earlier on. This is provided that the aircraft is below the FCU altitude and below 2,000 feet, as it is on the 350. Guys and gals, that's pretty much it for us. A short video, this one, on that particular case study, but a really useful reminder. And in fact, there's a number of things here that we can take from it. One, managing your energy on the approach. Really important. This can happen to anybody. This may well have been a very experienced crew. You're not briefing the inset from above, a shortcut, high energy approach, turbulence, distractions, lots going on, and a reminder here of the importance of briefing and planning, and critically, if it's just not looking right and it doesn't look like it's going to go right, it's far better to throw it away earlier on, to avoid where this crew got to very low, very fast, very close to the ground, and with an exceedance of a number of parameters. Far better to throw it away earlier on. The importance of managing our energy early and briefing to mitigate the threats, and a really good technical reminder here of the what's required, the engagement for the go around. Critically, that flap one selected. And think about, what would you do in this situation if you found that you selected the go around and you didn't get the go around modes? How would you manage this? Would you carry out what the crew selected? Obviously, a timely intervention would obviously be critically important, but just have a think about how you would go about it. And if you want to, feel free. I really positively encourage members to put their comments in their feedback in the comments below. So really useful. It's a great forum, this, to get other people's ideas. Well, thanks very much. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Lots more to come. I still have plenty of editing to finish. So now that we're entering into sort of the winter semester, more simulator work for me. I think a little bit more predictability on my day, a little bit more time to do this stuff, and hopefully some of that stuff will come out of my editing tray and actually come to you as videos. As always, stay safe, keep the plates spinning, and I'll see you for another episode in the very near future. Thanks very much.